Good evening, and thank you for tuning in. I'm James Milan. More than 18 months ago, ACMi convened a panel to address the tense relations between police and the African American community in the wake of the deaths of Michael Brown and Eric Garner in 2014. Here we are again, and much has happened in the interim, very little of it good, it seems. Respectful but frank public conversation about these issues seems more essential than ever, and that's what we are here to do. We are lucky to be able to draw on our panelists tonight who will speak to these issues both very personally and also from multiple areas of expertise. I'd like to open tonight's discussion by asking our guests to introduce themselves, starting on my left and moving around the table.
Thank you, James. My name is Ukumbwa Sauti, and I'm a cultural media studies professor. And part of what I do is to really help people understand from the context of media how we see our world and how those kinds of images affect us, how it kind of sets up expectations, social expectations, things like that. I also am trying to be active along with Black Lives Matter Cambridge and Mass Action Against Police Brutality, other organizations in the area. Of course, to bring some of my work onto the ground itself and not just in the ideological realm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hello, I'm Reverend Mikhail Thatcher. I'm a resident of Arlington, formerly a pastor of Trinity Baptist Church. I'm currently director of student life at Andover Newton Theological School. And one of my roles there at the school is to facilitate dialogue around difficult issues such as race. And particularly, we led a discussion on our campus for a year around the book by Claudia Rankine, An American Lyric, to help us talk about racial justice and race relations in America. And it was very effective to be able to get together a group of aspiring clergy and current clergy to talk about how, as future leaders, we can talk about bettering our society and find a common ground to attain justice for victims of the violence that's plagued our community the past couple of years.
Good evening, all. Thank you, James. My name is Fred Ryan, police chief here in Arlington. I have the great privilege of serving as a chief in my hometown. I've been police chief here for about 17 years, and I've been a police officer for about 32 years.
Hi, my name is Larissa Jeniton. I am a resident of Arlington. I moved here in 8th grade. I'm currently an acting major criminal justice minor at Pace University, and I will be a senior in the fall. I'm here because I am a concerned young woman of color, and I've kind of had it up with the protesting and frustrations and anger related to the news and the hashtag. So I'm here to be part of this conversation, kind of to figure out what the next steps are in the movement.
Thank you all very much for being here. I wanted to start, we're all obviously around this table familiar with the issues that bring us to the table to have this conversation. But just for the sake of all our audience members, I'd love to ask you, Larissa, to kind of let us know. I referred in the introduction to the fact that the last 18 months have seen more incidents, and if you could just kind of bring us all up to date.
Absolutely. I think I'll start with, for me, what was my December holiday break when we found out that Tamir Rice's police officer was not going to be indicted. That was probably like one of the most critical points for me and moving through the spring semester.
So just Tamir Rice again.
Yeah, so Tamir Rice, the young boy who was shot within 2 seconds of the squad car pulling up for having a toy gun, and he was playing in a park. Someone called it in saying that he had a weapon. It was just a toy gun. He was a young boy. I think he was 12. And he was shot dead by a police officer within 2 seconds of the squad car pulling up to the park. So of course it's a young boy, a young black boy, that could be someone that I know who has been shot dead, and of course everyone's making excuses as far as why he was supposed to be killed. And then moving forward from that, we had this summer the new round of hashtags, if you want to call it that, with Alton Sterling and Mr. Castile, both videos which made their rounds on the media. Personally, I was unable to watch the videos because they were very graphic, but I think that is what sparked a lot of people's interest this summer, the graphicness of the videos. I think one of them, his daughter was also present with him in the back seat. So it seems like things have just gotten worse. And then, of course, we had the shooting in Dallas, which, there was a lot of people taking sides as far as, Blue Lives Matter, and was it part of the Black Lives Matter movement? Is this Black people's retaliation against police? So it's kind of a melting pot of badness, if you want to call it that. We haven't really moved forward as far as how we relate to the police and how the media reports it or sends it out to the masses. So now we're here.
Yeah, we regrettably also have to add Baton Rouge
Yes.
shootings of police as well to that sad list, I'm afraid. And yeah, it's a lot to wrestle with, and again, we're here to try and just inch that conversation forward a little bit more. In so doing, if nobody else wants to add anything into that narrative right now.
Well, to mention the Dallas incident, my concern, I have a passion for the Black Lives Matter movement, which has done a great job in presenting the issues surrounding police violence and Black lives. And unfortunately, and also the thing about the movement, it's not just a Black thing. It's come out of the heart of the Black community, but it's a multicultural movement, and it's have a lot of allies from all walks of life. So it's a great opportunity to really bring societal change, because it's a societal problem in America. But because of what happened in Dallas with the murder of the police officers, is putting the Black Lives Matter movement in a position to be, derailed. And the thing that bothers me the most is that when people, hope it's okay to mention names of politicians, but Giuliani and former mayor of New York City, he goes on TV and just spouts these things about the Black Lives Matter movement as if it's a Nazi group and it's a hate group, this anti-police officer. It's far from that. And so when people like that who are so vocal and well-known begin to derail the Black Lives Matter movement, that really caused me a lot of pain there. And so that's why conversations like this are so important.
I did want to actually move forward in this conversation by asking each of you a question that pertains to your personal lives as well as your professional lives, and then invite all to respond if you have something to say after the person who I addressed the question to answers. So I'm going to actually start with you, Mikkel.
Sure.
You are the father of two college-age daughters, I know, and also you work as you said, director of student life at Andover Newton Theological School. So I'm wondering, you have the ear of young people, and I'm wondering, what have you found to be the most effective messages or ways of conveying a message to these young people to equip or prepare them for the world the way that we are talking about it being right now?
Thank you for the question. One of the things, being Black in America and being a father of two girls, as a matter of fact, too, is that teaching them to always be not afraid to speak up for themselves, to especially as women in a sexist society, not talking about racism alone, but sexism, so being able to be vocal. And this is a time where they have found their voice, because we see a lot of, as you mentioned earlier, a younger generation speaking forth. And this has become very important for me to be able to share with them and to allow them to give voice even when we're in disagreement. And we have generational differences in the household too, so the way I look at things sometimes may not be the exact same way that they see things, but they are vocalizing those things, and I learn from them. So I think that just to know that your voice counts, your voice matters, and keep on speaking out. And even when you don't get wholesale agreement in what you're saying, at least you're establishing a dialogue. And once you establish a dialogue, that's a chance for bridge building to take place. So can I just say one other thing about that in terms of my personal life and in terms of my daughters. I don't know if you remember of a number of years ago when you were guest speaker at the MLK meeting there, and I introduced my daughters to you. Mm-hmm. And that was a milestone for me, because I grew up in the South Mississippi, afraid of cops and hearing all the stories of police brutality, and I never wanted my daughters to be afraid of police, and being able to introduce them to you, and it was something. It was a great experience for me, and to be able to show them that police officers are people who are people too. They're part of the community, and shouldn't be afraid to approach and to talk to them. So I want to thank you for that time coming, and made my day for my daughters, because I don't want them to have the trauma that I had growing up.
And actually, my next question is for you, Fred, and it has to do with families as well. And that is that families are always affected deeply by the kinds of episodes that we're here discussing tonight. And often those effects can be swamped by the noise of the public discourse around that. So I was wondering and hoping that you can give us some sense, please, of how conversations are going in your own family and in the families of other police officers around these issues.
Thank you, James. Yeah, it's been a challenging time, obviously, to be a law enforcement officer for a number of reasons. And I, too, am the father of 2 girls. And I was listening closely to what you had to say. I'm a little bit behind you. Mine are 15 and 12. Not ready for college yet. But, there's an added burden to a family of a police officer. I know in my own neighborhood, all the kids know that's the cop's house. And, why it's different and why me playing basketball on the street with my kids is different than any other dad playing basketball on the street with the kids, but it is. And so we're used to that added burden. With the events of the past year or so, obviously children there's some talk on the school buses, on the hallways in school and so forth about it, and all their peers know that their dad is a cop. And my freshman has been the recipient of some unfavorable comments about that. So what we've done internally is we've done some educating with our staff. We've given some good talking points to be able to use at the dinner table with the children around these issues, and to be able to help them establish a dialogue with their spouses and children to help navigate these difficult times. And there's good language and good tips that we've distributed within our intranet at the police station.
Mm-hmm. And Larissa, you already addressed this a little bit, I think, in one of your earlier answers, but as you mentioned, you have been in college at Pace University for these last few years, including all the incidents that we've been talking about immediately. What has been your experience within that environment? What in particular do you take that might be hopeful or disheartening, or what's happening in college?
That's a great question. Thank you. I go to Pace University in the NYC campus, so I'm like right downtown, where a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests have been happening right outside the dorm building, where you hear them marching. And even though I'm inside writing that paper, there's a part of me that wants to be out there. So a lot of my sophomore year was, going out and marching at the streets till like 1 a.m. and coming back and writing that paper for the 9 a.m. class the next day. There was also, you're a student first and foremost, and then there's the emotional aspect of going out and screaming and hearing, I remember the night that we find out, I think Michael Brown's officer was not going to be indicted, all of us were like gathered in Union Square and it was dead silent, everyone's listening to cell phones, and then hearing that he wasn't, and then just that energy of everyone taking to the streets, and not just, that energy, but also the deep sadness that, justice was not served. So that experience has been very interesting, trying to balance being a student and just going to school as Larissa and not carrying that cloud over me of, what is this justice system? I think one of the biggest glimmers of light for me was one night when we went out protesting and we were out by One Police Plaza. And we have the big crowd in the center, and we've got the NYPD all around us, and they have orders not to interact with us or speak with us verbally, but they have to stand there. And everyone's screaming at them, and I managed to make eye contact with one of them, and although he couldn't interact with me, I'm just like asking him, I'm a human, you're a human, very, flower child type conversation. But I could tell through like the energy we were exchanging, that he understood where it was coming from. And it was a very emotional exchange, and I think that's where I kind of got the idea that if any kind of change has to happen, it has to start with talking to someone as a human being and not screaming at them. Although I understand that anger, and it's absolutely justified. I mean, there was a woman standing next to me who, I think she'd lost her son to police violence, and also another one had been harassed. So she was screaming, and I can't, disagree with that emotion because I've never experienced that. But there's definitely two sides of it, and I think, I'm blessed to have not had terrible experiences, and that also helps me have the perspective of, maybe there's more calmer, collective ways for us to move forward with the movement.
Let's hope so.
I hope so too.
Ukumbwa, I was wanting to know, and this is more a question that's going to your professional expertise and moving us into the next area of conversation here. And this is paraphrasing a question that we actually received from a member of the community. We solicited, as you know, from members of the Arlington community, things that they wanted to be able to ask themselves. And so to paraphrase, one of our residents was wondering whether is the incidence of these kinds of events and episodes, is it increasing? Has it increased in the last number of years? Or is your sense simply that we're more aware of these incidents because of cell phones and social media, et cetera?
Well, there's a number of ways to hear information around that, and one of the ways that we hear that is through researchers and writers who are looking at history over time. And one of the things we're hearing from them is that the oppression of African people, of people of color, of indigenous people has been happening throughout. That there hasn't been any tremendous change in some of that, in how, whether it's police force or the justice system or the injustice system, how that relates to people of color and to marginalized communities. Also, we hear from the community themselves, from the people themselves, the same thing, that these events are not necessarily new, they're not necessarily happening more so now, but we are seeing a continuation that we were just not able to see because certain technologies weren't able to communicate this information in the way that it can now, nor did we have the platforms that allow us to broadcast and share them in the way that we do, whether it be through television or through social media networking, things like that, places like Facebook and Twitter and other platforms. So what I have found, and from those elements and from other elements too, is that yes, these levels of oppression, these events, these violent events, have been happening over time. They are definitely connected historically to things that we can see that have been sort of in an unbroken history, in an unbroken fabric of the nation that we live within. So we are now seeing them in technicolor, if you will. We're seeing them repeated often. We see them in our feeds, if you will, more often than we might want to see them. But I would definitely say that we're possibly not seeing, it's not happening more, but it's happening at the same rate, possibly, with some up and down. But we're now faced with the reality of dealing with it. And I have to say that behind the wall of privilege, if we call that male privilege, white privilege, that now these things are pushing beyond those boundaries so that we all have to deal with it in a certain way. And that's where a lot of the dialogue is happening now, and that's where, like you said, a lot of the connections, the multicultural push forward to actually solve problems on a larger basis are really happening from, because our awareness is changing now, largely.
I want to move right from that to a next question, but we are going to take a very short break first.
Great, thank you.
So you have 10 seconds if you want.
All right. Okay.
And we are back. I wanted to just build on what Ukumbo was saying just now and throw this question out to everybody, and that is to say, from what you described, which is a similar level of such incidents has been going on for a very, very long time. We are now faced with, as you said, because of technology, et cetera, we're now faced with having to deal with these things perhaps in a way we haven't. So my question is, so is this a good thing?
I'm going to say yes, it's a good thing that we're dealing with it. It's a good thing that we're struggling with these issues. But we do have to know that people in these marginalized communities, people of color, indigenous people, women, have been dealing with these things all along. And we've been asking people to see them, from our points of view. And one of the things we understand about privilege is that oftentimes when we're on the other side of privilege, we often discount the experience of other people. Say, oh no, it couldn't be that way. It couldn't be that bad. It clearly could not be that way. So we're at this place of really trying to forward this conversation to get beyond those the narrowness or the if you will the blindness of privilege, and to talk about these power relationships that have sort of been going on since Columbus, as I always like to say. They've been set up from that point, and if not before then. So they have a long legacy.
I'll just jump in there. I do agree that it is a good thing that the awareness is spreading. Maybe this is a more pessimistic view. It is also incredibly painful having to be exposed to that on a daily basis. I know it's better for it to be seen than not be seen, but I think one thing that's been very hard for me and a lot of my friends of color is seeing the evidence, seeing the data all printed out in nice fancy sheets all over Facebook and Twitter, and still having people who will look at the facts and say, no, that's not okay, or no, that's not true, or no, that can't possibly be happening. I mean, there are people who obviously see the data and their ideas are changing slowly, but that's been probably one of the most painful parts for me is being able to, he was literally killed and the video footage is there, the officer just spoken on it, and people are still coming up with excuses that are as basic as, well, he was a black man and he deserved it. So that for me is I do agree it should be as widespread as it is, but also being exposed to that, that pushback every day, that sort of, you're not important, your life isn't important every day is very hard to deal with.
And the video is clearly a good thing. I mean, there's no question about it. And we say that we want to be transparent. Well, transparency breeds self-correcting behavior. You see your flaws and we correct them. But one of the frustrations we've had in law enforcement, and I've been clear and on the record about bias-based policing, so we don't need to revisit that. You know where I stand on that. But one of our frustrations is, in some of these incidents, did those police officers leave their house that night when they went to work with premeditation and a forethought to go out and commit a homicide? I would argue they didn't. And, are these cases of malpractice versus felony criminal intentional homicide? And so how do we as a, clearly some of these shootings have been, terribly wrong and tactically wrong from a law enforcement perspective. But, how then do we hold these police officers accountable for their conduct without assigning an indictment for a premeditated homicide? I would argue they're cases of malpractice. And if we look in America, depending on whose data you look at, the medical profession is killing anywhere between 100 and 500,000 people a year. 100,000 to 1 million is the data. And we're not marching in the streets that medical doctors are killing people. Police, yeah, we've had some, out of the millions and millions and millions of interactions we have over every year, we've had some very bad outcomes, and outcomes where people need to be held accountable. But is the consequence, or should the repair to the harm that those officers have created, should it be an indictment and incarceration for life like a premeditated homicide? I would argue it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think there are some really important things that you said there, around the, police industry, if you will, or the police field, and the medical field. There are clearly some issues where we should be in the streets, because of what the medical industry is doing, and there are many people doing some advocacy around that. But I think it is an issue of really holding those people who do these shootings, do these killings, and other kinds of things. There's other kinds of stories coming out about torture and about planting evidence and things like that. And maybe there is no premeditated thing at the beginning of the morning. It's like
planting evidence is premeditated.
Right.
There's zero tolerance for that.
Well, of course, but I would say even with a shooting, whether it's premeditated or not, it still happened, and people have to still be held accountable for that. How we adjudicate that is another issue, and that actually has to come into the realm of how do we hold the lives of people in a society, and do we privilege police lives over and above the lives of the people that they say that they're here to serve?
Yeah, no, I think we're in agreement with what you just said. You know, what's the disposition for these things?
Right.
And having been in volatile situations things are happening rapidly, I can understand how some of these things go terribly wrong. And you know, we've done a lot of training around slowing things down at these volatile scenes. Clearly, to the extent that we can slow things down, there's a better outcome. But, you know, I guess what I'm advocating for is some other way to adjudicate these situations where these cops put on their badge, took an oath, went out, were doing the job, got in the middle of a volatile situation, it went terribly wrong. I would strongly argue the overwhelming majority of them didn't go to work intending to kill somebody. And in fact, you know, no police officer that I know of wants to use their firearm or use lethal force. These things, you know, again, I would put them in the category of malpractice.
Let me just say this. I think part of the problem is you're right, it's not, I wouldn't say it was premeditated, but because of how we perceive race in America, I think a police officer who was white and come to the scene and have black persons who are the ones who have been arrested and accused of a crime, it begins when they see black humanity and they see that as sinister or evil or guilty, and that's part of how it goes back to how diversity training is presented within the ranks of police officers. Because I tell you a story of once I was in Brookline years ago, and I was living with a white family, matter of fact, and the 13-year-old boy had gone to the playground and he was being accosted by some other white kids, and he called me and said someone trying to take his bicycle. And I got there, and then I guess one of the neighbors had called the police, and the first thing the police said, I was the only black person there, pointed at me. Is he the one? Is he the one? You know, just assumption that the black person is bad or sinister or evil. And that's part of the fabric of our society that's racist and perceive black humanity as something that's not to be equated as the same as white humanity. And let me say this other thing, too, is that part of the visible problems that I've seen read stories of say a white person who come up to a police officer and slap him in the face and punch him and is never not shot, not fear for his life. That can't happen with a black person doing that. That person is going to be shot or killed or beaten to death, whatever it is. I've seen too many stories of that, and that's because how we perceive black humanity in America. And I think the heart of diversity training must be really examined and looked at, and how police officers react to a situation when their race, opposite race, is there.
No, can I actually just ask you, Fred, if you wouldn't mind, to respond kind of directly to that? You mentioned before, and you obviously are on the record for where you're at with race bias training, et cetera, and I know that Arlington officers are receiving that training. So can you tell us some concrete, you know, what kind of training is it? What's happening?
Yeah, I don't disagree with a word that was just said. You know, we hire from the human race. And so we bring police officers to the police force with their biases. And so then we need to be a little bit more sophisticated about helping them understand their biases and managing those biases when they come to work. And so we've done the unconscious bias training, we've done the de-escalation procedural justice training, which, you know, I won't get into all the concepts. I encourage you to Google those concepts. But one of the other things we did was there's some great training that comes out of Harvard, I believe. And so on a computer monitor, an image starts to appear slowly. It's a blank screen, and then slowly an image appears. And as it becomes more clear, it's a person with something in their hand. The data is abundantly clear. When it's a white person and that image in the hand, it's more readily described as something other than a firearm. When it's a person of color, it's more quickly identified as a firearm in that person's hand. So clearly, you know, bias lends to some of the things that we're seeing occurring across America. So, you know, how do we then get police officers in because we're quick to give out scarlet letters, you know. officers are afraid to ever discuss their biases for, oh, he's a racist and he's a this or she's a that. And so we need to create safe spaces to have these conversations.
Absolutely.
And flush this stuff out so that we can prevent from what we're seeing around America. We did this at the Whittemore Robbins house a couple of years ago on a Saturday, away from the police station, locked the doors, got our officers into the room with a trained facilitator to try to talk about this stuff. We had some school faculty there as well, Human Rights Commission. So it's important to do these things and to flush these things out and put people in safe places so that they don't feel like they're going to become labeled. But the other frustration we have, and I'll take just a couple of seconds, I have no control over the race of the people that I hire in the police department. And that's completely controlled and is a function of state law. We have a stated goal. I have a 10-point command philosophy. One of my highest priorities is a diverse police department. I have little or no authority over diversifying our police department. So when people call me and say they want to have a picket, and that's great, but if you want to talk about meaningful change, get a hold of your legislators and change the laws around the way we hire our police officers in Massachusetts. I get a list of names from the state. Usually it's all white men. And I have no control over diversifying the police force. That's a problem. President Obama's commission on 21st century policing is abundantly clear. A diverse police department has a whole lot of value for a whole host of reasons.
So someone else is generating the entire list of possible candidates that you are allowed to hire from?
I get it from a state civil service commission, from a list of people that have taken a multiple choice exam. That's how we hire our police officers.
Incredible.
So get our legislators at the table. Let's talk about that.
Good point.
And no matter how that happens, we still have to be about a cultural conversation and a change in our cultural behavior and in those systems, because racism is systematic, sexism is systematic, our heterosexism is systematic, that we create a context in which, we don't have, and what I would call the premeditation of racism, because racism creates a premeditated set of things that happens. And if a gun is involved in that, we could make a connection to a premeditated murder, on the issue of race. Because that's what racism does. That's what these isms do. That's what oppression does. It sets up a negative set of outcomes immediately for people. So there is, in that sense, a larger context of premeditation. But we have to be about cultural and social change, which includes these systems from the ground up.
Fred, you spoke just now, I think fairly eloquently as usual, about how important it is to create safe spaces for police officers to be able to engage around their own biases, et cetera, and to receive this kind of training. And that reminds me of the next thing I wanted to throw out to all of you, and that is the role of fear in all of the situations that we're talking about. So both from the police perspective, how it is that one deals with the inherent fear of that just attends a police officer's regular, daily activities, to being a person of color, moving through the world. How is fear functioning to distort these interactions, or to determine in some ways outcomes, and what, if anything, can we do about that?
Let me say training, on the other hand, in terms of understanding the emotional state, mental state of a lot of black victims. I think about the case down south somewhere where the black gentleman was pulled over by a police officer, and he panicked. He got in the car and he ran, and he was shot 8 times in the back. I think it's understanding the history of, as you said earlier, of trauma in the black community in terms of police relations, police brutality. I mentioned earlier that I grew up fearful of the police because of all the stories of police brutality that happened during the 50s and the 60s. I'll show my age now. I had heard those stories. And so I was traumatized myself. I was always very nervous around police officers. And since that conversation we had Sunday, I remember a story of police coming to our house when I was about 3 or 4 years old, looking for my father, looking under the bed and going around the house and everything. So that was a traumatizing experience for me. So there are many adults who are still living some of those traumas. So when they're pulled over, if police officers have that sensitivity and that training, knowing that for this black person, he may have a panic attack or something like that. That's very important. It's on the other hand, of course, we need to know that each time a police officer leaves his house or her house, he's putting his life on the line, and I have to realize that those are things we must do at the same time to try to diffuse a situation so it won't even happen. Like when I get pulled over, and I train my kids to do the same thing whenever they begin to drive, there's certain things I do. I think I shouldn't have to do, but I know that because of things now, I do. I have my license out, I have my registration out, I have my hands on the steering wheel, and because I look at the rearview mirror, seeing the cop coming to the car with a hand on his sidearm, and so he's afraid, he's nervous, I'm nervous, and so it's fear is a part of it. And so how do we negotiate that? It's a big question, and being aware of the fear on both sides it's a part of it.
And this is where community policing and policing needs to be done neighborhood by neighborhood. Lots of folks in the United States love to hate the healthcare system and the medical profession and so forth, but they love to know their primary care physician and be on a personal relationship with them. So their primary care physician they hold very dear.
Right.
The healthcare system is a pain in the neck, and same thing with cops. People love to know and touch and feel and love their neighborhood cop. They may not like law enforcement as a whole, but that neighborhood cop is near and dear to them. And so we've got to get back and get better at neighborhood policing when people are talking to one another, regardless of their race or gender or background, on a first name basis is critically important, so that their cell phone becomes more important than the walkie-talkie in terms of getting calls from neighbors to solve problems. And when we begin to build those relationships one person at a time in neighborhoods, I firmly believe we can make huge strides in some of the volatile situations we're seeing across America. It's got to be done neighborhood by neighborhood.
If you asked my mom, about 3 weeks ago, we were walking in Boston, and we were having a conversation, and all of a sudden the expression on my face just changed, and I looked super upset. And she's like, are you okay? What's going on? And she looks, and she sees like a couple officers walking across the street. Now, this is like 3 to 4 weeks ago, when, my fear is like manifesting in anger and resentment. And then I'm in Arlington for the summer. I'm trying to do some connections. I'm emailing with Chief Ryan, who I've never had any sort of interaction with before. I mean, I live around the corner from the Arlington Police Station, again, driving by with like resentment towards that building, and then meeting one person who 4 weeks ago I probably wouldn't have sat next to you, now understanding your philosophies, understanding you as a human being. It absolutely has to go back to police officers in specific neighborhoods, talking to those kids, going to the schools, talking to the parents that we know who they are. So now I can reply, talk to my parents, I emailed with Chief Ryan today. He has a name, he's a human being, as opposed to this big, scary entity with a gun who could do whatever they want and get away with it.
And that's why, James, I asked you to call me Fred tonight, And we need to get back to, we need to humanize these relationships. And it's time consuming, it's difficult, but it's so important to move law enforcement onto the next phase of our existence in this world. Clearly there's some work to be done.
And I would add that I think we need to humanize all the systems too, because of course it's not just about what cops do on any particular day, but how does the justice or / injustice system support cops who have acted with impropriety or with violence in an equitable way. How does it support those cops to stay on the beat? How does it, when it gives them, a paid leave, things like that, and the people are like, wait a minute, what just happened? That was a 12-year-old. That was 2 seconds after you got out of the car, and I hear what you're saying about, how we adjudicate, but I think part of what I heard from you is that we need to adjudicate. That there's many of these cases that adjudication just has to happen, and that we have to have this ability to hold every level of the society accountable, and to be able to see it in a way that we're being honest about it, and that we don't hand a system to our children in which they have to say, really, you didn't take care of this for us? You know?
Well, you know, and that's where the macro level stuff we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier. You know, one of the other frustrations I have in Massachusetts is, you know, the young man that cuts my hair has to be certified and can be decertified
Yeah.
if he
Steps
commits
up
an
on it.
act of you know, bad barbering.
Right.
How's
Brutality,
that,
yeah.
how's that for a lack of sophisticated
Trust.
analogy? But police officers cannot be decertified. Unlike in other states, New Hampshire, Maine, many other states, if a police officer commits an act, maybe, you know, a homicide's different, but, you know, violates his or her oath of office, the board, the certifying board can decertify them, and they no longer can serve as a police officer. In Massachusetts, and I would argue because of collective bargaining units and unions, no such thing exists. And so we need to have, absolutely need to have those systems in place to hold police officers accountable, and maybe a system like that could have prevented some of these things that we've seen, because I'm sure some of these officers that have engaged in this conduct had some other incidents leading up to it. Decertify them, don't give them the privilege of wearing the uniform, and prevent some of these things from occurring. We don't have that in Massachusetts. A barber has more regulatory control than a police officer.
Yeah, and that goes to your earlier point that, you know, it seems like there might be only two options. One is let them off scot-free, which is the perception that is so damaging, and the other is treat them as if they had premeditatively done what they did. Right. And obviously there's a lot of ground between those two things, and hopefully we can work towards finding solutions more in that ground.
Thinking of middle ground, what would you think about a civilian review board being in play in situations like you mentioned?
Yeah, those are things that I wouldn't oppose. The only difficulty with those, like I talked to my colleagues in Cambridge, there aren't that many complaints. You know, if I look at the number of complaints against Arlington police officers in the past year, I think there may have been one.
Oh, let me clarify that. I'm not.
And it wasn't a use of force.
Arlington
It
Police
was-
Department. I'm talking about in general.
In general,
Right.
I mean, as I said, transparency breeds self-correcting behavior. You know, I don't think that any police chief would oppose a civilian review board, so long as, you know, there are different models of the review board, so long as it's structured in a way that somebody on the law enforcement side and their lens looks at it as well. We don't have use of force complaints really in metropolitan Boston. They're rare, very rare. And those that we do sometimes see, not in Arlington, we haven't had one in, I can't remember the last time we had a use of force complaint. Sometimes it's used for criminal defense. I'm going to file a complaint against the police, say that I was excessive force, and see if we can negotiate a settlement on my criminal charges. So it gets to be some of that nonsense with the criminal defense attorneys. But I wouldn't oppose that.
I think it's wonderful that we are, you know, we live in a community that has, you know, little to no complaints.
Great.
But I'd much rather put something in place, you know, try to get something going as opposed to waiting until something does happen and then the town retaliates with, well, why didn't we have something in place already?
Because one day, Chief Ryan is going to retire, and as the Bible says, there came a day when there came a new Pharaoh in town that did not know the people.
Well, hopefully we're leading and training our staff. You know, I'm blessed with a good team. I really am.
And we are blessed with a good leader
Right.
at the top of that.
Thank you.
Well, we do need to take another break.
Okay.
So we are back, and I mentioned earlier I would like to turn the conversation to Arlington specifically now, and we've begun that part of things again. We did solicit, as I mentioned earlier, feedback and questions from our community. We have a couple of folks who responded that we would like to, and they responded with videos. So we're going to play those videos and then have you respond to them. The first one is from a young woman named Clarissa, and it is a couple of minutes long. So sit back and watch, and we'll wait for a response afterwards.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Clarissa, and I have a question for the police on the panel. So a lot of us agree with the fact that the lives of police are very important. We appreciate your service, especially in areas of high crime, and also we respect your heroic job choice. We know that it can't be easy. But why is it that when an unarmed citizen gets killed by the police, and the police officers get away with it, and we create a movement to highlight the injustices that were involved, that the police respond combatively? And I don't just mean with tanks or riot gear. I mean combative in a verbal manner. So, like, for example, Blue Lives Matter. Like I said before, we're all in agreement that your lives are important. But blue is not a race. Black is. And you chose your occupation. We did not choose our skin. And while we are very, very proud of our skin, it is also what a lot of the injustices that we face are based on. So when a slogan that was created to highlight injustices towards our race is appropriated to highlight a war on cops, which last year was a low in police killings, I believe, and also a high in unarmed black killings. There is no war on cops. So I'm a little bit confused as to why the narrative keeps changing from something that's supposed to be for peace. No one wants Black lives to matter more. We just would like to, get to the standard that a lot of other people are being held at. And so I guess I'm asking why it's there's such a resistance in helping us in this effort, and also why in a lot of situations this resistance has seemed to change to opposition.
So powerful statement from Clarissa, and I just welcome, I open the floor to any reactions.
Smart young lady. The First Parish Church in Arlington has been very helpful to the Arlington Police Department in having the conversations around exactly what Clarissa just pointed out, so we don't have that reaction from Arlington police officers. And if you go to their website, it's an excellent narrative on how they can both support police as well as the Black Lives Matter movement. And that was so incredibly powerful for our officers to see that up on the website, but also a sign on the lawn supporting law enforcement right next to the Black Lives Matter. That's what we need, more understanding and respect for one another's positions, a conversation like we're having here this evening. And they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, she's spot on.
I'll just throw in that it is an interesting contrast what you were just describing about First Parish Church and the fact that both of these things are there for everybody to see side by side. And we have the very recent example, and it's casting no aspersions on Somerville, but there's a contrast there in the fact that there was no attempt, as far as I know, to kind of accord respect equally to all of the people who can be involved and victimized in these kinds of episodes, and I think it's clear that's that's making it a little bit harder for them to reach some kind of accord and peace. But anyway.
Yeah, I think one of the elements that happens here is that we have to define privilege. We have to notice it, call it out. We have to define, that there is such a thing as white privilege, that there is a thing such as male privilege. And we have to be able to listen to the voices of the oppressed, voices of marginalized communities. And one of the things that Clarissa is calling for is something that I see that is necessary across the board, that when oppressed people or marginalized populations start to speak out about themselves, that it's actually time for people of privilege to say, to be quiet, to say, tell me more, to say, can you tell me more about that experience? What does that mean to you? To elicit more of that, as opposed to the reactionary context of, well, of course that couldn't be true, or even like in the case you were mentioning with Tamir Rice, people were actually trying to, justify that a 12-year-old could be shot within 2 seconds, of a police officer arriving on the thing, and well, maybe it's about how they were raised or something like that. But no, wait a minute. No, we have to listen to these voices. We have to hear what this context is, or else we're actually never really serious about taking care of the situation if we can't listen to all these voices that have not been heard up until this point. The voices of police actually are privileged in this society. The voices of white men are privileged in this society. So we have to be able to listen to those other voices and to center them so that we can actually understand what's actually really going on.
Okay, thank you. We want to move to the second of the videos that we had, much shorter. But this is Julia with a question of her own.
Hi ACMi, my name is Julia, and I was just wondering, other than attending protests and demonstrations and any other organized event, what is something that I as an individual or that we as individuals can do to better our community and promote more peace and equality in our world? Thank you.
I think in some ways, Julia, there is giving voice to something that you were talking about a little bit earlier too. What lies beyond hashtags and attending demonstrations and raising your fist in the air or something like that?
Absolutely. That's one frustration that I had. I love social media. I love how you can connect with people like that. But you can yell at someone through a keyboard. You can blame them. You can judge them without seeing that human face and seeing what reaction you're having with that human. So that's why, personally, what I wanted to do and what I managed to do last Sunday was organize within the community to sit down and have, quite simply, a conversation. Growing up in Arlington, I had a very specific experience as a person of color. It's a very, lovely suburb, but when you're the only black girl in the majority of your classes, it can have an effect on you. So I was not expecting as big of a turnout that came out. I was not expecting people to want to sit down to have a conversation, but I figured if there's any way to to start that conversation of, what is privilege, what is race, what is racism, it starts with a basic understanding that you need to speak to somebody about as opposed to throwing links at them in articles. So what you can do, I'd say to Julia, is to try to do that sort of organizing with your friends, maybe even just sitting out at the dinner table with your parents who might have different views than you and taking the time to, hear what they're thinking, tell them your opinions, because they're more likely to listen to their child or their aunt or their sister than a stranger on the internet.
Yeah, and my colleague in Dallas, the police chief, really nailed it in the days that followed the tragic deaths of his police officers. And he spoke to those demonstrating and said, be part of the solution. We're accepting applications out of the police department. Join the force. Help us, and I think that message is very important. And if I had his sort of audience here in Massachusetts, I would say talk to your legislators. Change the hiring standards. Put a certifying agency in place, certifying police officers, and more importantly, decertifying those who shouldn't be serving as police officers.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would add to that joining these organizations are really important too. Standing up for racial justice, SURGE, it's been called, and there are many organizations that are aligning themselves with Black Lives Matter, or National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, or any number of organizations that are already here, but that are doing educational processes. I was just at an event that was organized by Mass Against mass action against police brutality, around convict leasing. A really great documentary about that. Setting a historical precedent for what policing looks like and what it's been in this country. But also, there's things like that going. There are people that are looking about knocking on doors, leafleting, and having conversations like you're talking about. I always have these fantasies about our coffee shops, and we've got great ones in Arlington. Kickstand Cafe. Am I allowed to say that? I said it. So there. It's a great coffee shop, but those are some of those places that we need to have these conversations. That maybe we should close up our laptops and say, hey, wait a minute, we've got something to talk about here, and have them around our dinner tables, and be willing to have them in our corporations too, in our companies, and say, hey, look, let's go out for lunch for 2 hours today, and let's talk about this, because we're all in this context of this. We can't act like it's not happening around us or to us, and that's actually one of the things that hurts the most. When say we're that 1 or 2 or 10 people of color in a certain place, and people are not being aware that though we may all be at the table, we had to pay a different price to get there, and that's what hurts oftentimes.
We have, it's no surprise that time has flown, and we have very little time left. In that time, what I would like to do is just ask the question, or a double question really. We're all very familiar with Arlington, so what are some of the things that Arlington is doing right that other communities should maybe emulate? And conversely, what have you seen somewhere else that Arlington should consider adopting as an effective means to make this situation better? Because I do want to preface by saying, while we have few complaints about our police behavior, and that's wonderful, there have been issues and incidents in Arlington that show that we are not immune from these tensions.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Well, I would just say that been a resident of Arlington since 2004, working since 2002. I'm really pleased with what I've seen from the leadership of Chief Ryan and police officers in terms of their ability to communicate with the overall community, and as a person of color, I would say with the people of color. And so I would think that continuing that, going proactively within, say, houses of worship and other type of meetings, and being on the program, and as you do, and I think at your meeting on this past Sunday, a police officer was present. He spoke up, and we even gave him the opportunity to have the last word. So that's very, very important to be able to show the humanity of police officers there. But I think another thing that we can do is to be a part of the broader global solution, because I love what you do, Chief Ryan. But sometimes what the Black Lives Matter movement does, we speak to, preach to the choir, but sometimes it's good for someone within your own range to go to other communities to say what you're saying here. And it's very, very important. Just like what Julia was saying earlier in the video there, I think it's very, very important for our allies in the white community to hear conversation about white privilege from members of the white community. It just makes a more powerful impact. So being able to have more of those things, say that Arlington become a bedrock of that type of movement there. We have the framework for that, and that's what you do here. And like I said earlier, I was so happy that my daughters can have a chance to be able to see police officers in a positive light and not be fearful of police officers. And that's what we hope to establish in going forward.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm talking too long.
We have just literally a minute left,
Okay.
so time for one
Apologize
other
for that.
response.
Quickly, one thing I'm ashamed of, and at the risk of throwing myself under the bus, where we're most diverse in the police department is where I have authority over hiring non-police positions. We're very diverse. Those are also the lowest paying positions in the police department. So our entry-level, low-paying, non-police positions are where we have a high percentage of minorities. And the optics of that, I'm ashamed of. And we've got to address this hiring system with police officers. It's essential.
A quick thing.
Yep,
One
very
thing
quickly.
Arlington did well was they listened to an intelligent, powerful woman of color recently, and that was Larissa. And they gave her space to organize something that was really important, and we really appreciate that, and we thank Arlington for the context of that. But we hope that all of our work can allow that voices like Larissa's to come forward on a more regular basis.
And all 4 of your voices, which have been very, very helpful to me and hopefully to each other as well. So very much appreciate your coming here tonight. Hope that we've inched this conversation forward just a little bit.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Great.
Well, we have run out of time, but certainly not out of ideas and perspectives that deserve to be expressed. We urge you to carry on this conversation in your own lives and to share what you've heard here with everyone you can. This discussion will re-air regularly on our public channel, and anyone who either doesn't live in Arlington or doesn't subscribe to cable can find it on our website at acmi.tv. We will also continue this conversation ourselves, and you can look for the next installment of Global to Local in the near future. On behalf of our panelists and for Arlington Community Media, I'm James Milan, and thanks so much for joining us this evening.